Welcome to TLM Radio. I am your host, Tara Trask. Today I have with me Khalid Cannon. He is the president of Put Me In, which is a nonprofit that specifically serves the children of incarcerated folks. I think that's probably a fair assessment of it.
That's spot on.
I'm not gonna go too much into your history and background. Your personal story is incredible and fascinating, but I'm gonna let you tell it. So, if you would, can you just give us kind of a brief overview of where you started and kind of how you've landed in the role that you have now?
Absolutely. So, feel free to stop me if it's not that brief, but my name's Khalid, like you mentioned, and I'm originally from a small town in Alabama. I grew up on a chicken farm with about 200,000 chickens, so there was way more chickens than people. But my dad went away when I was about 4 years old, and it was just me, my mom, and my sister in a small one-bedroom farmhouse. And if it wasn't for my extended family, I don't know where I'd be today. But I was one of the lucky ones where I had a great support system of grandparents, aunts and uncles, a church community, and then ultimately a great group of youth sports coaches. And through all of their support and that overall feel of community, I was always doing the right things. I did well in school, did well on the football field, and that ultimately led me to have the chance to play football at Yale, where I was a 3-year starter on the offensive line. And that in itself was a life-changing experience, and we can go more into that later. But post-grad, I double majored in Chemistry and Geology. After graduating, I worked in a gold mining company in Canada for a year, and then moved to that same company in Vegas, and then transitioned into consulting, where I was connected with Matt Blodgett, who was ultimately the founder, one of the co-founders of Put Me In. And Matt and I just immediately bonded because we just had so much in common through our stories, where he was a Yale class of 2000 graduate, I was class of 2017, and despite being 17 years apart, we were just kindred spirits. He grew up with a dad in prison in Minneapolis. I grew up with a dad in prison in Alabama. He was a double major at Yale, so was I. He was on the football team. We're in the same fraternity. We both worked probably 20 hours a week on top of our 40 to 50-hour week football schedule to make ends meet as low-income students at a place like Yale. And so we just immediately connected over our shared experience, and the fact that this was something that we had kind of pushed down for most of our life and haven't really shared and talked about. And so when we connected, it was just something that was powerful, and we wanted to get together and help kids that were in our shoes, because at the end of the day, we're not special. We were a product of our support systems, and not every kid has that same support system. So it's up to us to put that ladder back down and help the next generation up. Yeah,
I love that. And, it sounds like you were an athlete your whole life. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I started playing t-ball when I was about 5 years old, and I'm from a big sports family. My dad had the opportunity to play at an HBCU in football, and then my mom was a junior college state champion in basketball. So it's just athletics in the blood, and it was just something that we always bonded and connected over. My granddad was on the board of our local baseball league, so I was with him flipping hot dogs before the first game every night, and it was just became part of my community, where I'm running around with no shoes on, and you've got all these other granddads and dads kind of watching out for me, and that was like one of my first exposures to having this greater village beyond just my immediate family. Right,
and what you're describing is the community that often forms around sports teams or sports in general. I'm an athlete as well. I was a gymnast when I was a little kid, but I kind of quickly morphed into becoming a diver. I was a diver, and I happened to walk into a pool at the age of about 11, and I saw a diving team practicing. I was at a friend's swim meet. And I remember going down there, and as it turned out, that diving team, the coach of that diving team was a 2-time Olympian and world champion, 1975 world platform champion. And so I was really blessed to walk into a program that was coached by a 2-time Olympian and world champion, which is just a game changer. My ex-husband was a swimmer, and he had a similar experience. Just being coached by Olympians sets you on a different trajectory when it comes to athletics in general. Because there's the community piece that you're describing. There's also this idea of excellence that I think a lot of us who have participated in sports and competed, particularly if we've been fortunate enough to compete at a high level, brings to it. And that just goes through our whole lives. Like, I'm curious as to how your athletic experience, not just the community piece, but also the excellence piece, I mean, obviously you went to play football at Yale, so I think there's something in there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that, like, Inside Out's one of my favorite movies, and I think they do such a good job at visualizing what are some of these core foundational memories. And I can think back to, like, what is my foundational, like, competition excellence memory, and it goes back to my very first season of t-ball. And like most 5-year-olds, I'm in the outfield, like not really paying attention, like
picking
kicking around
flowers,
dirt,
like looking around,
like chasing bugs, like just what every kid does.
Yeah.
And so I was like a complete non-factor on my team. But at the end of each season, they do a big award ceremony for all the teams. They pick all-stars that go on and compete against the other towns nearby. And as I'm walking through and my mom's giving me like a hot dog or a soda or something, I see this golf cart go by with these massive trophies. And I've just got this little bitty medal for participation on my neck. I'm like, Mom, I want one of those. Like, how do I get one of those big trophies? And she's like, those are for the all-stars. Those are for the kids that focus and compete and they work really hard. And for me, it was like, I'm going to get one of those next year. Yeah. And so I was 6 years old, so I wasn't really trying to like do anything extra in the off season. But that next season rolled around, and I was like locked in. I volunteered to be the pitcher, which in t-ball means you fake a pitch, and then you go and catch the little like dribbler that the guy hits right back to you, and then I beat him in a race to first base. But I was a unanimous all-star, and it was kind of started that feedback loop of it feels really good to compete and to be recognized.
That's the competitive spirit, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you can cultivate it in people, but I do think that, if you have it for whatever reason and it's going to get ignited at some point in the process. I was the same. I was, ended up on my swim team in high school, right? I was most dedicated freshman. I ended up being, captain of my swim team junior year and senior year. And there's just nothing that compares to athletic competition. And it really does help you so much in your life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, that's one of like the core tenets of our program where, yes, we're developing athletes, but we're not trying to develop the next CJ Stroud or the next Tom Brady. It's all about developing that next leader, because through sports, you can kind of think back on all these core lessons that you're learning, whether it's perseverance or communication and leadership. I think it's just something that every kid should experience.
Yeah. And in preparing for this conversation with you, I remember this was probably 10 years ago now, and I did find this survey that I looked at 10 years ago because I remember being so struck. At the time, I was a founder of my company. I was probably about 10 years in. I've owned my company now for, coming up on 25 years. This was an Ernst & Young ESPN survey in 2015 found that 94% of women in C-suite positions played sports. Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing that, and I just thought, well, that makes sense to me. But I wonder if just even knowing that, and then I actually found a more recent one, August of 2023 from Deloitte, that women in leadership roles in their careers, 91% of them say that the skills they developed playing sports were important to the success in their professional careers. And it does make me think, okay, well, what do we learn in sports that helps us to succeed in the business world? I think it's perseverance. It's understanding how to lose. Mm-hmm. It's understanding how to be, a bloodthirsty competitor on the field and then going off and being able to slap people on the back and have a good time. And I think that is probably one of the skills that's most useful that you can translate from sports to the business room. I'm curious your thoughts.
Oh, absolutely. I think all of those skills are so critical. I was reading another study recently, or probably just an opinion piece, around the most talented people don't get promoted. It's the people that are most connected and well liked within the organization. I think a lot of that goes back to being a good teammate. Where in my consulting role, we would evaluate ourselves pre-project and post-project. And one of the first questions we were often asking ourselves was, were we a good teammate on this project to everyone else? And when you think about like the business world, there's so many just team elements to that if you learn those skills at 5, 6, 10, 15 years old, then you're an invaluable teammate the rest of your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we can all kind of see in the work environment the folks who don't have those skills. Because those are the folks that they cannot take constructive criticism. They don't necessarily collaborate all that well with other people, can tend to be kind of grabby with praise and things like that. And I think if you've participated, I was a swimmer and a diver. You'd say that's not a team sport. But it is, of course, because you have an overall score or how your school does against the other, So those things do matter, even though there's some, my son's he ran 1 year as a D1 track athlete. And, even track and field, like, very much a team sport. So it just seems like those things all translate.
Yeah, absolutely. Like as a former offensive lineman, you're used to not getting any of the glory. Like if our name shows up in the box sheet, it's probably because we got a penalty and something bad happened. So you're used to just celebrating the team success as a team and not really worrying about when you're getting some of that negative feedback. And it's that we over me mentality that I think is really important. And I think those skills translate where if we get negative feedback, like, oh, that's my fault. That's not maybe the person who's directly responsible's fault. Like I'll put that as a leader on myself. And then you can kind of see some of those tendencies translate. And I think being a little selfish, I think offensive linemen are the best leaders in the world.
Well, I mean, I think you make a case for it, right?
Uh-huh.
That works. So let's tell us a little bit about how, okay, so you're playing football at Yale, and that obviously had an influence on your leadership style and things like that. How did you find your way to put me in? And then also, tell us about how you've impacted that organization, how that organization has impacted you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So my experience at Yale itself was absolutely life-changing. I had never been on a plane before until Coach Reno brought me up for my official visit, and my mom hadn't either. So
Wow.
I remember like taking off, like we're going to go to this other part of the country, and my mom had lived in like this little southeast region her entire life, and she'd been to a bunch of states there, but she just being on a plane and realizing it's not that scary, it's not that expensive, just opened up the entire world to her. So that in itself was life-changing to our family. And then going to a place like Yale, you're exposed to so many different individuals. Like I remember kind of thinking back to like one of the first times I really realized that I was a little different than everyone else, because growing up poor in Alabama, like everyone's kind of got some tough situations, but then going to a place like Yale, you're sitting around the locker room and people are talking about where they summer and what are they doing for like this break and that break. And then you kind of hear like talks about, oh yeah, my dad. And then you hear like, oh, what does your dad do? And there's my dad's the CFO of Apple, or my dad's a partner at Morgan Stanley. And then the question would kind of come around to me, and I would kind of think to myself, like, I'm not going to answer this. Like, my dad's on parole. And so I would just kind of find ways to like slink out of those situations. And I think this was just a part of me that was like hidden throughout most of my Yale experience, where like a few of my close friends knew the situation and they knew why my dad didn't go to games and why he wasn't around or I didn't talk about it. But it was something that for the most part I would try to hide that stigma and just try to fit into the best of my ability. But then during the summer of 2020, I was catching up with one of my best friends. Like I was working as a consultant. There were no projects at the time, so I would spend most of my days walking around Austin and chatting on the phone with folks. And my friend Peter had just started volunteering with Matt and put me in. And he's like, we're going to help kids with parents in prison. We don't know exactly what we're going to do yet, but this is who we're helping. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then I hung up and kind of just like kept on my day. And 30 minutes later, I was like dawning on me, like there was just like something heavy sitting on my chest. And I was like, wait, I was one of those kids. And I called Pete right back and it's like, hey, you got to introduce me to Matt. And I got Matt's email address. I sent him an email that night. He responded within 15 minutes and we met, I think maybe 2 or 3 days later. And we still have the email address. Like it's coming up on the 5-year anniversary of this connection, but we immediately connected around, we basically lived the same life, just 17 years apart. And so I started helping him at nights around my consulting work, basically just applying my consulting skills to put me in, where when I was working in the gold mining company, I was traveled around the world implementing software. And so with Put Me In, I implemented our payment processing system. And in my first job ever at Yale, I was a cold caller at the Alumni Fund. And so I started putting together some of our cold calling scripts and some of our other fundraising strategy. And so Matt and I met every single week for about 2.5, 3 years, just working on different projects and finding out ways to get plugged in. And he was also just kind of mentoring and coaching me through this whole time. So I couldn't be more thankful for that time. But then in the spring of 22, we got a really nice grant to hire someone full time. And Matt put together the job description and went to the board, and they kind of turned to me and said that we think you're the perfect fit for this. And I'm like, there's no way I'm the perfect fit. But then the more they talked about it and they described like having someone with lived experience who knows what our families are going through and who's been so invested since day one, is just at that point it was a no-brainer. And so I kind of timed it up to learn a little bit more from my job, wrap up a few more projects. And then in the fall of 22, I took over full time. At the time, we had 22 kids in the program in San Francisco and Boston. And then my mandate was to figure out how we can scale this. And so since then, we're now up to about 115 kids in 15 states across the country. And we're getting great results and great feedback from every kid in our program.
I love that. And I want to get into more detail on exactly what the program does, but one of the things you said I want to drill down on a little bit, and I'm just curious, what were the similarities in your experience that you all sort of bonded over, and what is that like to have a parent away like that? And for I guess how long was that, or is that, I don't even know. Just tell us a little bit about what that was like for you as a kid at the time, and then kind of what you bonded with him over.
Yeah, I mean, so my dad, I think, first went away when I was about 4 or 5, and then he was just kind of in and out of the system pretty regularly there. Like going back to like that concept of inside out core memories. Like one of my earliest core memories was like winning some academic award at kindergarten, and I got like a prize, which was like an old secondhand action figure, and I was like, oh, I can't wait to show my dad this. And then going through the visitation line, and there was some metal in the action figure, so it was getting flagged, and they wouldn't let me through with it, and I was just like, why can't I show my dad this? Like, I won this. And then thinking about how hard that could have been, or how hard that was. And so there was just like a lot of like consistent disappointment.
Young. That's so young too. I mean, this is not at all the same, but my mom died when I was 10. And I remember very specifically that it just took me like, it was actually a couple of years before I even really understood like actually what had happened. And I can say, it's not like, I do remember having times being like, well, I mean, she could just walk right in the door. And you just have these kind of irrational thoughts around it because you're too little to be able to understand what's happened. And at 4, I wonder how you could even process why he wasn't around the house like maybe a dad or 2 on the street that you knew,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was one of those things that's just kind of like in and out. And so I think at an early age, like I set very low expectations in others because of those relationships. Like my mom was great about making sure that we were always connected to both sides of the family. So she would go and drop us off at our paternal grandparents' house, and sometimes he was there, and sometimes he wasn't, and you just like never knew what to really expect in those situations. But I think being able to tap into those relationships when he was around was always great for us, where he wasn't always there, but when he was there, he was great. Like he's one of my best friends still today, and I'm super thankful for that relationship.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And so was there any specific conversations that you had with the founder of Put Me In that you were talking? I'm just curious about the things that you all talked about there. You were like, yeah, that was my experience as well.
A lot of it was around the stigma that's attached to it, where we spent most of our life kind of hiding this part of us. And I don't know if we kind of connect to some of these other episodes, but Larry Miller talked about this in his episode, and I heard him talk about it at the Jump Launch Initiative a few months ago, where like this is just a hidden part of you. And it's something that you don't want to share with the rest of the world because you're not sure how they're going to react. You're not sure if they're going to look at you as you're going to follow in those same footsteps, where me, like no one knows my dad's situation. So I was Khalid Cannon, the A student. But if they know my dad's situation, I'm Khalid Cannon, son of a felon. And so thinking about that was just something that we would always hug really tight. And Matt had that exact same situation where I was pretty lucky where we actually moved away from where my mom and dad were living after the arrest and moved back to the farm area. But Matt was living in his own community where his dad had done harm to people in his community. Like he has to look his classmates in the eye knowing his dad stole from them. And so like that stigma is just something that you carry with you forever. And then when you go to a place like Yale and you're surrounded by future presidents and Nobel Prize winners, you don't want to do anything that puts you at a disadvantage perception-wise. And so you just kind of sink in and hold those secrets tight. So I think us just like sharing openly was very rehabilitative to both of us. We were able to bond about some of those moments where other students are going to some of these really cool dinners and speakers, and instead I'm working a night job trying to make ends meet so that I can afford to go on spring break later on with my friends.
Right. Your experience in school was just different than theirs, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When we left off, we were talking, and I wanted to speak a little bit more specifically, not just from your personal experience, but from now your experience as part of Put Me In. What are the challenges that the kids of incarcerated folks face that are pretty specific to them?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So parental incarceration is considered an ACE, an adverse childhood experience. And with it being an ACE, there's so many just ripple effects that happen there. They're, I believe, 3 times more likely to be living in poverty. There's an increased likelihood of teen pregnancy. I think by the age of 12, there's a huge increase in the likelihood that they're going to be dabbling in recreational drugs. There's tons of research out there. I'd highly recommend people look up Rebecca Schlafer from the University of Minnesota. She's doing some amazing research on some survey data they have out there. But we could talk about the deficit-based language that can be associated with parental incarceration all day. But one of the things that we want to really focus on that Put Me In is a positive organization, and we always focus on what they can do and not what people say they're going to do. There's, I believe, a very hated statistic in our community that 7 out of 10 kids are bound to end up in prison themselves. And we believe that that's just such negative language. When you say that over and over again, you're perpetuating that cycle, and you're telling them that that's what they're going to become. Where at Put Me In, we just talk about what they can become. We give them all these opportunities. I think one of the things that makes us unique is when we onboard a family to our program, we don't really talk to them about this, welcome to our charity. We tell them that this isn't a charity. This is an investment firm, and we're investing in their potential and how they can potentially grow and become this next great leader. They can be anyone they want to be. And through sports and through these communities and villages that we're creating, they have the world is their oyster. They can do whatever they want to do.
I love that. And it actually makes me think of something that my daughter explained to me. We were talking about some mental health issues, and she was telling me that, well, a lot of, I'm understanding that like a lot of people have these particular kind of things. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, I get that. I understand why we would want to talk about it that way, because it does give room to somebody who's experiencing something where they might shame themselves. At the same time, I do wonder that saying, oh, well, this happens all the time to people with this particular condition kind of sets the stage in a way for it to happen. I don't know where the middle ground is on there, but it seems like that's something that you all have grappled with.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be the balance of acknowledging what the risks are, but also like refusing to normalize that.
Right.
We're not going to fall into that same cycle.
Right. That's interesting. And so, and I know too, it's not just about the kids. Can you explain exactly what is provided to the kids through the grants that you do, and then also how are the parents affected by this?
Absolutely. So organization, what we do is we give kids $1,000 a year in financial aid that goes towards new equipment, registration fees, and travel. And they can really use that in any sport they see necessary. We developed a mobile app in 2021 that allows us to distribute this funding and monitor it very closely. So we're not writing them a blank check for $1,000. What we're doing is we're giving them an opportunity to go and make requests on that funding to unlock what their potential could be. We don't specify what sport they play. We've got a lot of dancers and ballerinas and cheerleaders. We've also got a lot of just your typical American sports like football, basketball, baseball. But one of the things I was not necessarily shocked by, but a little surprised when I first took over was the amount of combat sports we have. There's so many kids who are going through their current familial situation, and they're just really angry at the hand they were dealt. And boxing and mixed martial arts and karate has been a great outlet for them to get that anger out, and then also learn how to hone those deep, dark feelings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a big thing. My son achieved his adult black belt at 17 in karate, and the just mind management. I've seen him completely, take down a bully without having to, his ability to manage those situations. And it all comes from a place of like, well, you probably don't want to fight me because I'm going to kill you. So he has that strength, but he also has the knowledge and the training to understand how to diffuse a situation like that. He actually had that happen. And then he went into his dojo and Sensei Mike said, we're going to spend this whole time talking about what happened to Baden at the mall and how he handled it, which was really cool as a parent. And additionally, when he was looking at colleges, I'm absolutely convinced. West Point was recruiting him. If he hadn't had that black belt, I don't know I just know that was an important thing for them because of that length of time, like you say. And I think that's also an important thing for people to understand about the fighting sports and the martial arts sports. There's so much more to it than the violence.
Yeah, so much center of control right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but But with that, though, we're giving the kids choice, like through that mobile app where they can log in, and our younger kids are using the funding exploratory. They're bouncing from sport to sport, finding which one's their niche.
That's great.
But as they're bouncing from sport to sport, they're finding new communities and new villages. So they're building this network of adults that care about them. If we go back to our talk about ACEs earlier, there's an inverse of that where you're talking about the positive experiences that children face. And on one of those quizzes, it's, is there a trusted adult in your life that's not a parent, that doesn't live in your household? And through sports, we're being able to create some of those new contacts for children. But when we launched the organization, we kind of had this one-track mind of we're going to help kids through sports. And what we're finding after 5 years is that the impacts are rippling through the entire family. So our approach to treating it as an investment firm, their caregivers feel really empowered. We're mostly working with moms at this point, but they feel really empowered to have the choice to get their kids in whatever their kids want to. Like, imagine how hard it is to tell your son or daughter, no, like, we can't afford this right now. Like, letting them down and seeing that on their face. And at a certain point, that kid just stops asking. Like, that's difficult. Yeah. And so we're giving those parents the ability to say yes and to be able to let them be just like every other kid. And we're getting great feedback from the caregivers on how good that feels. From the incarcerated caregiver, we're creating a bridge of reunification, where we often go into prisons and I talk and tell my story, and then we sign up kids directly from that incarcerated parent, and then that's a gift that they get to give to their child who they might not have spoken to in 5-6 years. We've also heard from some caregivers that they're starting to get to the point, or before the program, their kid was getting to the point of not wanting to chat with their dad. Like, what are we going to bond over? Like, I'm out here playing video games and you're doing whatever you do inside. And they just didn't see eye to eye. And so through sports, the dad is getting mailed that son's basketball schedule or the daughter's softball schedule. And now their dad's calling and saying, hey, what's your free throw percentage? How was practice? Right. How'd that game go? And this is a way and method for them to have some conversations and reconnect and find that common ground. We've heard from one father who loves playing basketball in the yard. And now he's talking to his son about playing basketball and how they do push-ups together each night. And this is recreating those bonds and that reunification where we're strengthening that family unit.
Yeah, that's amazing. And as I'm thinking about it, it makes perfect sense that it would, I can't think about my ex-husband who was a swimmer, but, the depth to which he understands my son's, his splits for the 4x1, his, just all of it, way more than me, but it's such a bonding thing for them. And there's no reason that can't translate just because dad is incarcerated. That's incredible. And then also, I think any of us who've been athletes know the importance of those coaches in our lives. I mean, we all, I think, have at least one or two coaches in our history that made an enormous impact on us. And so to be able to bring that to kids who are already down that ACEs scale because of their situation that's just incredible. What a great program.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is amazing. You touched on the app, and I think that's not a small part of what you are doing with this program. And I know you were tasked with scaling it, so I was imagining that you bringing the technology in was part of your charter. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and how it's impacted the scaling?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So when we started the program in 2020, we kind of put together the foundation of what we're doing as an organization. And then we enrolled 10 kids in San Francisco or the greater Bay Area in January of 21. And through that, Matt was doing it all by himself at the time. I was still just a volunteer, but he was managing all those disbursements and the requests for new softball bats or football cleats. And it was taking about 20 hours a week to manage just 10 kids. And we realized that this isn't going to scale. So one of the things that we started doing was we took a step back, and one of our unofficial mottos that put me in is ASAP is poison. Like, we never want to rush into things. Like, one of the common mantras in the tech world is move fast and break things, or you can't do that in the nonprofit world because if you break things, those are lives. So we took a step back and thought about how can we scale this, how can we become more efficient, and then run our organization like a software company. And so we worked with a great team to develop our mobile app. We built that in-house and then outsourced a little bit of the coding. And through that, last year we had 100 kids in the program, and it took me about 45 minutes a week to manage that. Like, think about that efficiency.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, so we've got the ability to scale across the nation, and the funding is our only limiting source. So we've got the technology to really grow it.
And you can you could scale to other activities. Like you were talking about. Like, it could be, you could scale to people who need funding for music or for, as an athlete, when my musical kid turned up, I'm like, I don't know how to help you. And when she was momentarily without a musical outlet and she was just dying on the vine in front of me, I was calling the school and trying to talk to the music department because I'm like, I have a musician, I'm an athlete, I don't know what to do. And thankfully they helped me. But even something like this, to be able to scale it to different kinds of activities that we still know are going to be really beneficial, that's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's so many applications for what we're doing here. Like we typically stick strictly into our sports category, but I have kind of ventured out of that a couple times where one of my favorite requests I've done was for a kid named Rodney in the Bay, and his mom reached out asking if we could cover his Rubik's Cube competition, and then she sent me a video and his fingers were flying and he won.
It's a thing. That's a real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. He's out there competing. He went to practice. Like he was consistent at improving at this. I'm like, all right, that applies. And so we covered the $35 for him to compete in that, and I think he still does that in his free time, but now he's a great high school soccer player.
That's great. And that, there's no doubt that probably fed in somehow, maybe not directly, but somehow to him playing soccer, I would guess. So was he doing the full Rubik's Cube or was he doing the 2 and 2, right?
I think the full one.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. Yeah, I was never. You're chemistry, right? So you probably did all that kind of like super smart stuff.
I've played around with it. I've actually never successfully solved a Rubik's Cube, but I do love puzzles.
Yeah. That's awesome. Tell me how, you spoke a little bit about sort of navigating Yale. And that's a place that was not built for you. Navigating the nonprofit world is also a place that was not necessarily built for you, and that's got to be a bit of a challenge. I'm just curious, what kind of obstacles or difficulties have you had, or has the organization had?
So starting on the Yale piece, I think it inherently wasn't built for us, but I think the community aspect of Yale, I think it's a very unique place where people that go there love each other. And there's like this unrequited respect of like, you went through this experience, like you braved New Haven. And then there's just the bond that's being created, like generation to generation. When you think about me and Matt, who are 17 years apart, and then you think about one of our board members, Alyssa Tambora, who is a recent Yale graduate from the law school. We've just all been able to connect and work through that. And then as we're building out the organization, the Yale network itself has been super supportive of what we're doing. Like as you mentioned, like I'm not a native to the nonprofit world, like coming from the business background and trying to learn how to fundraise on the fly and build out this organization by myself for the last few years. The Yale network has been our biggest funder. Like they've been really supportive of what we're doing because they can all look back. Most of them can all look back and say, playing sports in the Ivy League changed my life. And every kid deserves that chance, whether they end up in the Ivy League or they end up at a junior college or they just end up in the high school careers where their sports career ends, but they learn all those lessons. And that the Ivy League community has been so receptive to us in that instance, and Yale specifically. And so super thankful to all of our board members who do have Yale affiliation, like Matt, Alyssa, and then also Ken Gorelski, where we've got a great support system that's backing us through all of that.
I mean, it's a special place for sure. I work with a lot of lawyers, and I work with a lot of Yale Law School graduate lawyers. And, I think, I don't want to offend any other law schools, but it's pretty much the number one law school.
It's hard to beat.
And I know a lot of people who have come out of there and, to a person, I mean, they really are just incredibly smart, incredibly thoughtful. And so, I do sense a bit of a different kind of community at Yale. As opposed to some other places. So it's good to hear that. You mentioned your board. I think we should let the listeners know there is there's a little bit of a connection between, you've got a board member of Put Me In whose father was a last mile graduate, I think. Is that right?
Yeah. So Alyssa Tambora is one of our founding board members, and she's got an amazing story in her own right that I'll always reserve for her to tell on her own time. But her dad was a graduate of the Last Mile, and Alyssa's been on the board for so many other nonprofits that are focusing on children of incarcerated parents. And I'm super impressed by how she's really latched on to our community as a cause, and she's been changing lives for probably a decade now for everyone who's doing this kind of work. We were just at a conference in Phoenix a few weeks ago, and one of her mentors was being recognized who recently passed. And there's been so much work that Alyssa's fingerprints were all on, and I'm super thankful to have someone as impressive, resilient, and brilliant as Alyssa on our board.
Yeah, that's great. And, there's a recurring theme, at least that I'm beginning to sense, even I'm pretty new to the host chair, but there's a recurring theme, and that is one of sort of breaking these generational trauma bonds over time. And it's just something I feel like I always want to remark on when I see it, because it's easy to think, when you hear all these amazing stories of people really changing their trajectory, not only of their own lives, but of the lives that are going to come behind them, some of the lives that are around them. And those things, all of these programs, things like The Last Mile, things like Put Me In, other programs that are out there, they can facilitate that, but they can't actually do the work for people. And so I just feel like it's so important to acknowledge that everybody who has made a real change in what their family history is, because we know normally it goes the other way. Mm-hmm. It's just not a small thing, No,
thank you. It's one of those things that no one can do it for anyone else, but as long as we can create space for others to find their own path through that, where through sports we're not going to solve parental incarceration overnight, but we're going to create paths for kids to find their own confidence, find their voice, and figure out how they're navigating their own individual situation.
Right. And I do think it is important that the kids are impacted, the parents are impacted as well, the incarcerated folks. And I would think that then puts them in a better position to maybe seek out programs for themselves, to better themselves when maybe they wouldn't have thought about that. But now all of a sudden they're able to keep up with their kids' baseball, scores and how he's going through the season. And I can't imagine that that's not inspiring. What do you hear from the parents themselves about how being part of this program impacts them?
Mm-hmm. So one quick side note, one of our favorite metrics that Put Me In is tears on the job, where pretty much every Friday, Matt and Danielle, our VP of development, will hop on a call and we're just recapping the week, and generally the tears are just flowing because we've got some kid who's done something amazing, or there's something that we've overcome that week with a family. And it's just a really emotional line of work where Matt and I are big burly football men, but we're not afraid to cry. Yeah. So that's one of those things that's really important to us. One of the common sparks for those tears on the job is when we get letters from incarcerated parents. We've gotten a few of those in the mail over the years, and it's just always so thankful. I've been into prisons across the country now telling my story and talking about how we're going to help the men and women and there's kids. And it ends up just being like a venting session where we're all kind of crying together, talking about how amazing their kids are and how amazing they can be. I was recently at San Quentin with The Last Mile, and we spoke to so many fathers in there who were just so excited that they felt seen, and that someone was in there thinking about not only them but their kids and giving them an opportunity to give a gift to them where they're going to continue to be supported. We were also heard, as when you go into The Last Mile or go into San Quentin, you're given rules about no hugs, nothing physical, just handshakes. But as I was in there, this big burly man gave me a big hug and said, if I had a program like this growing up, then I probably wouldn't be here right now. I had no one looking out for me on the streets. And you could just see in his face that he believed that. And that's the validation in terms of product market fit that we're looking for. When those guys say that they want something like this, not only for their kids, but for their past selves, that's when I know we've got something special.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I was in San Quentin a couple of weeks ago doing some interviews, and one of the residents that I spoke to, and I was there on Trans Day of Visibility, and I was speaking to one of the residents who actually transitioned inside San Quentin. She has only lived as a woman in the facility. And one of the things that she talked about was just, it's really the love of her daughter that has kept her going all this time. So just the relationships with kids in general is something I think we probably don't pay enough attention to.
Mm-hmm. And I know exactly who you're talking about too. I had a great conversation with her as well, and she's brilliant. If people walk away with one thing that's not Put Me In related, it's just that there's so much talent sitting behind bars right now. There's so many talented people waiting for their day to be free to then go back to contributing society with all of their amazing talents.
We've been talking this entire time about what too frequently is a generational cycle of incarceration. I think there's countless examples of that. Your program, and I believe the Last Mile as well, these are the programs that seek to throw a monkey wrench in that cycle. Can you tell us a little bit about how specifically Put Me In addresses that and how it relates to not just the kids, but how it's benefiting the parents?
Absolutely. And so when you think about some of those statistics we were talking about earlier, where deficit language-wise, 7 out of 10 kids are likely to follow in their parents' footsteps. And one of the things we're emphasizing is by surrounding them through communities and giving them opportunities where they can build some of these critical skills that are going to make them successful, then they have the opportunity to stop this cycle. We think about ourselves as an investment firm. We're investing in their potential. Like, this is also an economic issue where the state of California is spending 6 figures a year on incarcerated individuals. And if we think we can divert that, where $1,000 a year in our program can divert that in the long run, like, that's a pretty good return on investment. And I feel like anybody would take those odds any day. And so we're seeing some great results from that. We recently had a mom reach out to us and asking just general questions around what have we seen through some of the parents that have re-entered society. And so I think one more step back about our program is we enroll kids whose parents are currently incarcerated, but we stay with them until they graduate high school, even if their parents are released. And so we recently had a young girl whose dad has been released, and her mom was like talking about some of the challenges where her daughter thought everything was going to go back to normal overnight. And it just doesn't work that way. Like, that's 5-6 years of a damaged relationship and figuring out how to repair that. It's not instant. And so we kind of talked about how I've seen what happened with some of the other parents in the program and how using sports as that bridge can be really helpful, where this young girl's dad was a really big soccer fan, and she's become a really, really talented soccer player at 11, 12 years old. And so one of the things that we talked about is her dad driving her back and forth to soccer practice now, and maybe even volunteering to coach on that soccer team. And that's another bridge where that relationship's going to be able to be repaired. And what's that not only doing is strengthening the relationship between father and daughter. It's giving that daughter those critical skills through sports, but it's also cutting back on the potential recidivism of that father, where he's now deeply invested in his daughter's success, and he's got no need to really fall back into that same path, where he's going to be working extra hard to stay in that daughter's life. He's not going to want to lose her again and go through this whole process all over again.
Right. And that's such a profound and excellent example of how the program can assist that not happening. I do remember reading about the program that once you're in, once a kid is in, then they're in all the way through high school. What I didn't understand when I read that was that is the case even if the parent is paroled.
Yeah,
and that's a really profound difference. And clearly, there was a lot of thought that went into doing that. The story you just told, for one.
Yeah, absolutely. So one visual for that I heard really early on as we're putting the program together is that a family's kind of like a mobile over a child's crib, where you've got like the 4 elements kind of spinning around in a circle on its axis, and then when you rip away one of those elements, that mobile is going to start shaking all over the place, but it's going to find its new level. And it might not be spinning flat, but it's going to be spinning on a new axis, and it's found its rhythm, and it's going to be going in that angle. But then when you add the parent back into that child's life, it's going to shake all over again. And we want to be there for every single shake in that family's life and make sure that that kid has a positive outlet and has a community that they know cares about them.
That is a great visual in order to think about what that actually means, because that's abundantly true. And I love that visual. I do think that, I think for folks who would be sort of naysayers about any kind of these programs that are designed to help. I mean, it's pretty hard to complain about a program for kids, but at the same time, undoubtedly, there's always going to be some naysayers. And I think the point about the recidivism rates, it's the same reason. It was one of the main reasons the TLM came into being, I know, because, when Chris first went in and spoke to the men and then came back out and they just started looking at recidivism rates, both he and Beverly were like, this is a horrible use of taxpayer money. People are just, going out, coming back in, going out. 50% recidivism rate in California? That's terrible, right? We need to be that's bad for all the taxpayers. So even to those folks, people who are uninterested in helping incarcerated people or their families, I make that argument to them, right? Like that's why would you not want to support programs that are actually going to reduce the recidivism rate when we know that it costs, I think, over $300,000, a year? Or I don't know, I probably got my numbers wrong. But we're talking about 6 figures per year per incarcerated person. And that's just not money well spent. That is not money well spent all around. So, I mean, a program like this, programs like TLM are meant to address that.
Absolutely. I've heard from some of our supporters where we can be considered an apple pie nonprofit, and the last mile as well, where it's not much more, it doesn't get much more American than this, no matter what side of the aisle you fall on. Like, you've got to love the ability of kids to play sports and be kids. And we are doing a societal good here by potentially saving them millions of dollars down the road. We don't have the data to track it just yet, but we're consistent, and we know we're going to have that down the line through our mobile app and through the technology we've built, where we're going to be a data-driven organization, and we're going to be able to show the impacts to society that we're driving just by giving kids a positive outlet to be just like everyone else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That feeling of not having to feel isolated or weird or that nobody has your experience is a real gift to give a kid who is still developing. That's a real gift. Tell us where folks can find you.
Yeah, I'd say LinkedIn and Instagram are our best outlets to give us a follow. Check me out on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect and share more stories. We've got some amazing kids in our program that I'd love to tell you about. So follow us on there, follow us on Instagram, and then feel free to reach out to us at any time. Like we can't wait to share the impact and the stories that we're building here, and keep an eye on us. We're going to be around for a long time, helping kids and changing lives.
Well, and I think, as I've sort of taken over this chair, one of the things I do anytime I'm preparing for a conversation is the questions bubble up immediately are like, what are kind of the overarching statistics that are the basis for where we find ourselves on this, whatever the topic is. And I do think sometimes in programs like these, because they can be qualitative, they're a little bit difficult to collect data on. And that's fine. Like I'm a statistician, right? I'm a social scientist, so I'm all for qualitative data as well. I really like a mix, like that's the best. And you in no time, you're going to have a lot more of that as you have more kids in the program. But you're also going to have, the beautiful mix, which is the stories you've been telling, right? We never want to let go of these personal stories. They really matter. And then when you can combine those with the data that's going to come from your app-driven platform for the program, you're going to be off to the races. Well, you are off to the races, but you know what I mean. Like I can't imagine. The sky's the limit. What a great program. Thank you for joining us in this conversation with Khalid Cannon on TLM Radio. I am your host, Tara Trask, and we will look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tara.